the Family Service Association Prevent Child Abuse Council, welcome to the 2020 Prevent Child Abuse Prevention Series. My name is Katina Murray, and I'm the board chair for the Prevent Child Abuse Advisory Board. This year, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Prevent Child Abuse Council has worked diligently to offer an educational event to inspire youth workers. We are grateful for the continued support of our sponsors and their commitment to the safety and well-being of every child. Thank you to our presenting sponsors, the Indiana Department of Child Services, Center Township of Howard County, and Anthem. All of our featured speakers and community leaders that have provided their recordings in accordance with social distancing. We thank them for their commitment and contributions to this series. We also want to thank each of you for attending. Everyone benefits from a community where children are valued and protected.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Barb Hilton, Director of the FSA Prevent Child Abuse Program, and I thank you for being here. I'd like to take a few minutes and acknowledge our sponsors and some of our community members. This year, our three presenting sponsors are the Indiana Department of Child Services and the Center Township of Howard County and Anthem. The Indiana Department of Child Services has granted regional prevention dollars to our council to provide the prevention education through this conference. I want to thank Stacy Morgan and our local office, as well as our Region 6 Prevention Council, SCAN, and Paige Hamilton for the opportunity to provide this education. The mission of DCS is to engage with families and collaborate with state, local, and community partners to protect children from abuse and neglect and to provide child support services. Their vision is that all Indiana children will live in safe, healthy, and supportive families and communities. I can't think of a group of people I respect more for the work they do and their dedication to deliver on these ideals. I also want to thank our local Howard County DCS office for their engagement with our council, not just in planning this event, but 365 days a year. They serve as advisory board members, as conference planners, as committee members, and volunteers for our outreach events. They are an incredible group of public servants dedicated to the safety of our children. The Center Township of Howard County has supported Family Service Association and the Prevent Child Abuse Program for several years. Their mission includes service through collaborative efforts with our community service providers, who are the not-for-profit agencies that provide services to the poor and needy. It is an honor to work with them and to provide services to those in need, whether it is a safe place for their baby to sleep, those who need car seats, or providing the education to help parents be better parents. We are grateful for our partnership and the support that we receive from the Center Township of Howard County. I also want to thank Darla Pugh, who serves as a member of our advisory board and council. I am also grateful to our Anthem team members who have been a presenting sponsor for our conference for several years. Improving lives and communities is at the heart of the Anthem mission. Their values include leadership and community. I want to thank them for supporting us as we reach out to our community and do our best to improve the lives in Howard County. I see Anthem members involved in many community events and actively providing services to those in need. Thank you, Anthem team, for partnering with us to serve the community.
We'd like to start today by welcoming Mayor Tyler Moore as he reads the Proclamation for Child Abuse Prevention Month in Kokomo. Without the constant support of the City of Kokomo, this day would not be possible.
Good day, all. Mayor Tyler Moore here, and it's my distinct honor to issue this proclamation on behalf of Prevent Child Abuse Howard County and the Family Services Association as we recognize April as Prevent Child Abuse Month here in Kokomo, Indiana. Unfortunately, due to this year's pandemic, the conference has been canceled, but again, it's my honor to participate virtually and issue this proclamation on behalf of both associations. So, this executive order, whereas in federal fiscal year 2018, 4.3 million reports were made to Child Protective Services. And whereas child abuse and neglect is a serious problem affecting every segment of our community, and finding solutions requires input and action from everyone. And whereas our children are our most valuable resources and will shape the future of the state of Indiana. And whereas child abuse can have long-term psychological, emotional, and physical effects that have lasting consequences for victims of abuse. And whereas protective factors are conditions that reduce or eliminate risk and promote the social, emotional, and developmental well-being of children. And whereas effective child abuse prevention activities succeed because of the partnerships created between child welfare professionals, education, health community, and faith-based organizations, businesses, law enforcement agencies, and families. And whereas communities must take every effort to promote programs and activities that create strong and thriving children and families. And whereas we acknowledge that we must work together as a community to increase awareness about child abuse and continue to promote the social and emotional well-being of children and families in a safe, stable, and nurturing environment. And whereas prevention remains the best defense of our children and families. Now, therefore, I, Tyler O. Moore, Mayor of the City of Kokomo, Indiana, do hereby proclaim April 2020 as National Child Abuse Prevention Month in Kokomo, Indiana, and urge all citizens to recognize this month by dedicating ourselves to the task of improving the quality of life for all children and families. In testimony whereof, thereto I set my hand and cause to be affixed the great seal of the City of Kokomo, done this 3rd day of April, the year of our Lord 2020, by the Mayor, Tyler O. Moore. Again, now more than ever, we need to continue to raise awareness, so it's my honor again to proclaim this and ask all citizens to join in recognizing this month. Thank you and God bless.
Our first speaker is Dr. Lori Desautels. Dr. Desautels has been an assistant professor at Butler University since 2016, where she teaches both undergraduate and graduate programs. Lori was also an assistant professor at Marian University, where she founded the Educational Neuroscience Symposium. Lori's passion is engaging students through the application of neuroscience as it applies to attachment regulation and educator brain state. Lori graduated with a BS in Special Education from Butler University, an MS in Counseling Education from Indiana University, and she earned her PhD in Philosophy with an emphasis in early adolescence and thought formation. Lori resides in Indianapolis, Indiana with her husband Michael. She has 3 grown children, Andrew, Sarah, and Reagan, and 4 rescue fur babies. Please welcome Dr. Lori Desautels.
Good morning, everybody. I am just so excited to share with you this incredible research and the application of this research for our children, for our families, and for our educators, anyone in our community who works with our youth that are really struggling with adversity and trauma. I'm doing this by myself today, so I'm recording, and hopefully this is going to go off without a few glitches. But I want to thank Barbara for inviting me, and I want to thank the Family Service Association of Howard County for just really modifying this presentation and making it available through virtual means today. So I'm going to be sharing my screen and with my PowerPoint. And I'm so grateful to all of you. This pandemic is going to really affect so many families. All of us are going to be affected with some trauma and adversity in the coming weeks and months and years. And so many of our children and adolescents and families that are struggling right now with very compromised situations, this is going to be a double whammy. So this morning, what I would love to do is just to share with you a little bit of the brain development research and really looking at how adversity and trauma intimately affect our cognition, how it affects our stress response systems, and how it is affecting relationships. So then after we look at the development for a little bit, I'm going to share with you some of the practices and strategies that we are using in our schools, in our communities that have just really helped to calm the anxiety and to lessen the effects of that survival brain state that becomes activated when we are struggling with, focus and attention, and it really just grips us with this inability to think clearly. So I can't thank you enough for having me. I hope someday soon that I can meet everybody in person and return. So anyway, I'm going to start with sharing this PowerPoint. So I'm going to hit this and we'll pull this up. And I'm going to minimize this just a little bit so you can see. So what we're talking about today is actually a framework, and I cannot emphasize that enough. It is a framework that is built on 4 pillars, and I'm going to be talking more about those pillars. It's not a program. We know that this framework is based in the neuroscience of looking at relationships, looking at our neuroanatomy, how the brain develops, and really looking at the significance of attachment and connection. And then also, really delving into what strategies and practices regulate our brains and bodies. So please feel free. I'm going to be sending resources to you, but please feel free to reach out to me through email, and I'll share all of that information with you at the end today. So this came across my social media when this pandemic started to really become very prevalent, and it just struck me. So I want to share this with you. In the fall, I will remind schools that some of our children will tell us in their behaviors, my body remembers the pandemic. My body remembers the grief, loss, isolation, fear, hunger, and danger. I was alone. My body remembers when this school that I trusted or this community that I trusted suddenly disappeared. I don't know if I can trust you. What if it happens again? I need to keep myself safe. So as we move in today to the brain development and body effects of trauma and adversity, I want to share with you just a couple of things to keep in mind. We know that our brains continually develop throughout young adulthood. And when there is trauma and adversity, it not only affects our thinking and our capacity to think, but it affects how we feel and experience and perceive our worlds. And this is so critical to understand because trauma is not just about the brain. Trauma is about the body overwhelm. It is a physiological, sometimes ongoing and chronic reactivity or response to events that have happened that are over, but in the body and brain, they continually are activated. So these are, in this slide, I wanted to show you some of the sensations that we are using in reparative practices with our children and adolescents in school. We are using these practices, helping children to identify sensations, helping adults to identify sensations. Every one of these practices that I'm sharing with you today are about the adult brain and body as much as they are about children. It's just that children have a fragility and a vulnerability right now because the brain and body are developing. And so trauma and adversity can hit children in different, sometimes more intense ways. So these are sensation words. And what we know is that oftentimes after an event has passed, there may be a smell, there may be a sound, there might be a sensation like someone's tone of voice. There might be the posturing of someone or the look of clothing. That's why I've added these triggers over here. And I have seen this several times where, everything is going just fine in a morning meeting or in a classroom, but all of a sudden, this student just flies off the handle or just bursts into tears, or there is this emotional overreactivity, and we don't understand where that has come from. So these are, over to the left-hand side, these are sensation triggers, and we feel them in our bodies, and yet they are held in implicit memory. Implicit memory is body memory. And it's when we don't have conscious memory, oftentimes, of some events or experiences that have occurred earlier in life, but we hang on to those through sensation. So this first activity is we give children sensation words to draw or to color or to give shape to. So oftentimes when I go into the classroom, and I will share my experience with you in just a few minutes, but this past year I have been in a 5th grade classroom. I think that's what keeps my work alive and fresh, because I'm co-teaching twice a week. And so we start a morning meeting. You could start off with a small group session. This is for families at home, but we talk about sensation. We have the children draw it. So what would fluttery look like? What color would it be? How big is fluttery when you feel it in your tummy? What does edgy? What color is edgy? What shape is edgy? What does edgy feel like in your body? So this is a practice and a strategy that I'm sharing right off the bat. And I will give you the resources for this. But when you can name something, you can tame it. This is Dan Siegel's research. What's shareable is bearable. So anytime that we can use art, we can draw, we can paint, we can color, when we can even write in a journal, getting it out of the body and putting it in a safety container out here is regulating to the nervous system. So starting with this is something we use as a ritual, as a routine, as a procedure in our schools, in our classrooms. And this is a great adult activity. I think before you would start a meeting with adults, before you would have we talk to our administrators, before you start working with with your staff, this would be a great way to kind of give everybody a time, a moment before that meeting starts to really just get focused and get calm from the day. What we know is that trauma, as I've mentioned, is body overwhelm. And when I think about the pandemic in this time, COVID-19, it really speaks to a situation that has happened too fast, too soon, and it's too much. And any type of significant trauma and adversity that comes in with these descriptors can dysregulate us, and we literally begin to what Dr. Siegel calls kind of downshifting and moving into a survival brain state. So again, implicit memory are body memories, and we are really learning that We need to meet children and adolescents and adults in the brain state that they are in. So we kind of moved away from talking about behaviors, and we're looking more at the brain and body state. So trauma and adversity are not just cognitive. It's not a thinking thing. It really is an experience that is body overwhelm. And I love over here at this bottom left-hand side, this quote: you can understand something cognitively, but this is very different than how you feel about something. We can tell somebody that they're having a great day. Look at what you've accomplished today. You know, you got your work completed, you got here on time, you've made a couple of new friends today, you've look at the data, you've had this great week, you've had this great day. But that doesn't really matter. It's how we feel and sense ourselves that is speaking to other people. So it's interesting. A good friend of mine that is also a colleague described adversity this way. He was saying, Lori, I think when there's too much, too fast, too soon, the body goes one way and the mind goes the other way. And it's like we cannot keep those synchronized. It's hard to do that. We're thinking logically, but our body is feeling, that stress. Our hearts are beating. We don't know why we can't catch a deep breath. And so we know we're safe, but we don't feel safe. And that's something that, I want us to think about as we move through this presentation today. So I love this. If you want to know which way the wind is blowing, you've got to look at the sand. And if you want to know how a child or how any person is feeling, we can so often look at their bodies. We read nonverbal communication. It is about how someone postures. It is about their gestures. It's about how their facial expression is conveying that sensation, that emotion, that brain and body state. And the good news today, because it's going to be a little dire at first, but the good news today is that the brain and body are built for resiliency. We have this incredible neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity, there's been a lot of talk about that lately, but it's our natural ability to change structurally and functionally in brain architecture based on every experience we encounter. And that's a growth mindset, and that's resiliency. So the brain is built to heal and to repair. And when we feel connected, when we feel felt, when we feel safe, that is the recipe for well-being. Dr. Steve Porges says it this way, that success, and I like the term too, well-being, is when any of us are feeling safe in our bodies and in our environments, and we feel felt or we feel connected, then we can learn, then we can problem solve, then we can create a pause in our reactions. We can be reflective. We can think that, okay, I'm feeling this way, but it doesn't make sense. So this is extremely important to brain development, and I will talk about that too. So this slide really shows activation in limbic system structures. And the brain is built from the back, so from that brain stem to the front. And the brain literally does not finish developing, sometimes until late 20s or early 30s. And so children and adolescents have very appropriately underdeveloped brain architecture. But when any of us are thrown into fight, flight, or shutdown, which can happen several times a day, several times a week, we see activation in two structures, the amygdala. But the amygdala is that structure that is in the limbic structures of the brain, where the red, you can see the red here. they're almond-shaped structures that really act as our threat detection system. So the stress that we experience, whether it's coming from outside or internally, is activating what we call the amygdala, which is our brain's smoke detector. And that smoke detector then, when it's activated, it starts firing and it sends then projections, to other areas of the brain that really state, am I safe? Is this threatening? Is this unfamiliar? And what's happening? So I am completely oversimplifying brain architecture today. Dr. Bruce Perry speaks to this often, and I understand why he does, because if any of us are on a 3-mile walk and we've walked 2 inches, that's about how much we know about the brain at this time. The brain, I'm going to talk about the brain in regions today, but the brain is complex. The brain, we know not only very little, but there are projections and synapses happening all over the place. And so it's very, very difficult to talk about it accurately this way. But for our purpose today, I will talk about brainstem function. I'll talk about limbic system function, where you see the activation on each side of the temporal lobe. And then we'll talk about cortex function, the executive functions that rest right behind our eyebrows. So when we think about these areas of the brain that are activated in a fight, flight, or shutdown response, the strategies and practices that I'm going to be sharing with you today are addressing these areas. So we know that the prefrontal cortex right here is not developed until later in life. And we also know that it is the seat of problem solving and creating a pause, sustained attention, response inhibition. It's working memory. And those are all of the executive functions that are underdeveloped in adolescence, but as we move through into adulthood with more opportunity and experiences they develop. But this part of the brain goes offline when we are in a survival brain state. When we are in fight, flight, shutdown, then especially left cortical activity, left hemisphere cortical activity begins to atrophy a little bit. And so if you are feeling chronically stressed, then Dr. Bruce Perry calls this state-dependent functioning, and it actually affects our cortex so much that we really do not have the cognition that we have when we are calm. I mean, it affects the way we think and how we think. So this is really critical, because many of these big achievement gaps that we keep talking about in our schools are really more highly correlated to adversity gaps. These are children and adolescents that are functioning almost daily from a hypervigilant, hyperarousal state, which I'll talk about, and they are not accessing these executive functions. So, what you don't use, you lose. And this is something that is extremely important for all of us to understand in a very simplified way. So this framework today talks about 4 pillars that address applied educational neuroscience. And we're looking at these 4 pillars. Let me go through these. The very first one is my brain state. I want to share with you today that this is not just about your professional work. This is about our personal lives. I would have been a very different mom had I known what I know today, as far as my calm, regulated nervous system affects those around me. A dysregulated adult cannot regulate a child. When I'm rough, there is contagion that is felt by everybody that I'm encountering. So the first pillar of this work is educator, brain, and body state. The second pillar of this work is attachment, and we're calling these attachment practices touch points. The third pillar of this work is regulation, and I'll talk more about that. But regulation is really not something that we do to somebody else. It's being present for someone, and it is a gentle eye gaze. It is the way we greet somebody who's feeling very compromised. Co-regulation is what we must have in place before words are ever exchanged. And it's for the reason I just mentioned. A dysregulated adult is incapable of regulating another human being or a child. Then the fourth pillar of this work is teaching our children and ourselves the science beneath our behaviors. When you understand why you feel anxious, when you understand why you're so angry, when you understand that it's not a disorder or a disease or a dysfunction, you feel empowered and you feel relieved to know that there's nothing wrong with me, that my brain, based on experiences, has learned how to fire and wire with these projections and synapses. And I think that's just very significant. We have seen our students not only get excited about learning about their brains, but they begin to feel like this makes sense. And so they're more empowered to try the practices and strategies that we're sharing with them because we lay the groundwork first. We tell them, this is what's happening in the brain. Somebody said to me, I love this. Someone said to me not too long ago, Lori, applied educational neuroscience is not adding to anybody's plate. It is the plate. It is the plate for counseling, for social work, for businesses, for our homes, for school, for our mental health community. Our brains are foundational and bodies to every practice that we are implementing. So it is the plate. And that's really, it's a perceptual shift for all of us. I love this quote from The Good Earth, for they were not evil men except when they were starved. And I think that's so true, is that when any of us are feeling calm and regulated, we know how to empathize. We know kindness. We know how to share. We know how to create a pause and to deeply listen to another. But when any of us are feeling so chronically overwhelmed with the negative emotions that arise through our experiences in that survival state, we are in survival, and so we look selfish. We look angry. We can look oppositional and defiant. We can look apathetic or shut down. Dr. Mona Delahooke has this beautiful analogy with regard to behavior. And she says, behavior is only a signal. Our job, and this is true for me as a mom, and it's true for me as an educator, our job is to look and listen beneath the signal. What is that signal communicating to us? What is that need communicating to us? Which goes along with not what's wrong with this child, but what happened to this child. So many of you are, and if I were with you in person, I would ask for a show of hands. So forgive me for this virtual presentation. I'm going to keep moving, but the Adverse Childhood Experience study has changed everything for me as an educator, as a mother, and as a community member. The original study was conducted in the mid to late 90s, and in a nutshell, this is the largest public health study that was ever conducted. There have been many since then, but this initial study showed the high correlation between adversities in early developing years to mental and emotional and physiological health outcomes. And so the higher your adverse childhood experience number or score, the higher the dose response relationship to diabetes, to heart disease, to accidents, to addiction, to alcoholism, to mental and emotional challenges. So it affects almost every disease, because what the research has found is that the brain is not immune to inflammation. And inflammation is a part of almost every physiological disease that we encounter. So this study has shared with us as educators that a child who walks in with 4 or more adversities, with an ACE score of 4 or more, is almost 40 times more likely to have academic and behavioral challenges. So the ACE study is not the last word because of resiliency. And what the research continues to share is that it's not only about the adversities that we've had in our lives, it is also about the relationships and the connections that can buffer and support those adversities. And again, that's the good news. And the resiliency research shares that even if a child has experienced significant adversities like poverty or being exposed to early death of someone that they have loved, or knowing and having a loved one who has been incarcerated, or being in an environment where someone that they have grown up with was experiencing alcoholism or addiction. I think there were originally 10 adversities on the survey. There are so many more today. But my point is this, is that even when a child has been inside toxic environments and has grown up with significant adversities, with one emotionally available, consistent, predictable relationship, those ACEs can be overcome. And I think that is just miraculous when we think about the brain and brain architecture. So this is not a disorder that we're talking about today. This is a reordering of neural networks in the brain. And we're really seeing that these true significant achievement gaps for our most challenging children and youth are tied to the adversity gaps that they are carrying into school. And we call those pain-based behaviors. I love this visual that Dr. Gabor Mate shares about the trauma tree, and looking at how the suffering and the emotional contagion is so real in environments where children and adolescents and any of us are exposed to that continuously. A child, it's very interesting today, the symptomology of ADD and ADHD look very similar to many of our children who are carrying in high numbers of adversity. And Dr. Gabor Mate talks about how when a child is exposed to chronic trauma in those developing years, that oftentimes that escape response is that child is trying to escape and turn away or tune out from the chaos. So therefore, we see some hyperactivity. We see some inability to attend and focus because our entire life we were trying to feel safe and feel connected. And when we didn't, we were putting our attention here. We were putting our attention here. And so ADD is a true neurogeneticist developmental disorder, but it is also a disorder that can be associated with trauma. So I again, want us to really think about how trauma and adversity are generational. They are historical and institutional. And so we know that there are community ACEs, not just individual ACEs that play upon one another. So as we move through this today, the initial study is called the theory of everything. There is a correlation between childhood adversity, the developing brain, and adult well-being, which the initial or original adverse childhood experience study shared. And again, since that time, there have been much larger studies and much more diverse studies. The immune system is our body's operating system. And I love this quote from Donna Jackson. She shares that our emotional biography becomes our physical biology. So we know, and we are beginning to understand today, that the early stress we face when we are young changes not only our immune systems, but it affects our perceptual systems, our hormonal systems, and it affects how our cells respond and even DNA. So this is really important for us to understand as we move through this part on brain development. Educational neuroscience, you can see it lies at the foundation of everything we do in our communities. It is a part of mental health practices. It's a part of restorative justice. It's a part of social and emotional learning. It is about conscious discipline. It's about zones of regulation, but it is not a program. And I cannot emphasize that enough. It's this incredible framework. And for any of us to feel safe and to feel connected, we've got to build the foundation of our brains and bodies. We've got to build that home of safety and connection before we could do anything else. Because a home that does not have a strong foundation is not going to be steady. So I love this graphic because I think it really shares that. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the children and adolescents that are so misunderstood. Manipulation and control are survival behaviors. And not only are children trying to survive literally, but sometimes manipulation and control are the only tools that they use, because they don't know how to use any other tools other than to manipulate or try to control. So in counseling sessions, in schools, we see behaviors that look intentional. But what we're seeing are children that are using these manipulative and control strategies because it's what they know, and it truly is a survival response. What do we do with that? Again, in a framework, this is not about fixing kids. This is about respecting where every one of us are in brain development at any moment. So one of the things that I always share with educators and counselors and social workers and mental health practitioners is that it's really important to be emotionally available, to be consistent, and to be predictable. And those conditions happen when we use frequent feedback, when we check in, because that says to our adults that we work with, or to children or youth, that we're here and we're not going away. And this right here is one of the most challenging conditions that schools are going to face in the fall when children return, because that emotionally available, consistent, predictable environment and adult was stripped from that child in March, and there's no closure. So this is very important for us to think about as all of us prepare to work with the youth that have experienced COVID-19. Frequent doses of small choices feels very good. It feels soothing and comforting. It feels empowering to the brain and body under stress. And space and time is very, very important. All of us have sensation, or what we call repairing sensations, that feel good to us under stress. I know for me, I love to get under my weighted blanket. I love to do yoga. I love to be with our pets in our house. But for our children, some of them need space and time. They just need, whether it's in school or at home, they need a few minutes. They need to be by themselves. We'll talk more about in my breakout session about some of the strategies that I won't be able to get to in this keynote. Nonverbal assurance is critical to calming the nervous system, to dampening down our stress response system. And that happens again through facial expression and our gestures and our tone of voice and proximity or lack thereof. So resiliency is learned, which I want to share this with you today. If a child is not exposed to kindness, he or she does not develop brain circuitry for kindness. If a child is not exposed to empathy, they don't develop the skills for empathy. And it's the same for resiliency. These are skills. They're not soft skills at all. They're critical skills. And resiliency is learned. And the way we learn anything is by the experiences that we encounter and that are in front of us. So, this really says that, children, if given a chance, can overcome their suffering. And this is really the good news. This is why I wake up so hopeful and why I'm so excited about neuroplasticity in brain and bodies. We know that our brains have these superpowers, and I want to talk with you about that for a couple of minutes. The brain, as I mentioned, is malleable. Neuroplasticity, I'm going to oversimplify, but basically it's saying that the way we look at somebody, the way our office or our classroom looks, the aesthetic appearance, sounds, our greetings, the way we ask questions, the way we validate, how we use touch points, all of that can change a brain structurally, meaning we are able to calm and to regulate a child, and oftentimes unintentionally, through our tone of voice, we can escalate and change a brain structurally so that we've actually elevated their stress. So neuroplasticity says that every brain and body changes based on experiences. And they change structurally and therefore functionally. When I talk about function, I'm talking about the behaviors that we see. We know that the brain is a social organ. We can't survive without one another. Our brains thrive in relationships. And it's interesting. The term relational poverty is oftentimes what we are seeing that can be very traumatizing to kids, where they don't, again, feel felt and they don't feel safe because they are not in safe relationships. So the brain is a social organ. It is constantly reacting and responding and attuning to the environment and to those individuals where there is continual interaction or lack thereof. So we will continue on. Let me speak just for a minute about regulation and what that is. There are a lot of definitions, and it kind of tends to be that now really trite word that everyone's using, but I really think it's one's ability to tolerate stress in their window of tolerance. And that's different. That's like a unique. We all have, different windows of tolerance. And sometimes our windows of tolerance can change several times a day. But dysregulation, when any of us feel negative emotion to the point where we are not thinking clearly, we are kind of frozen in fear or in worry, anxiety, that means that an experience has happened outside our window of tolerance. Children who are not able to integrate the trauma through affect regulation communicate that through their bodies. and I mentioned that at the beginning of this presentation, is that, we can tell how a child is feeling oftentimes much more accurately by their nonverbal communication and how their body is looking. So patterns of behavior, which can oftentimes be that implicit memory that's buried deep into body and brain architecture, is woven into our cells. So we cannot change behaviors overnight. And traditional discipline protocols don't work with children who are carrying in pain-based behaviors. What happens is that our children who carry in pain and who carry in significant adversity, when we use exclusion or isolation, or we are using restraint, or we are not providing predictability, we can unintentionally escalate and re-traumatize that child. And that's why the new way of discipline, this new lens for discipline, calls for positive, repetitious conditioning, because the brain learns through patterned, repetitive experiences and opportunities. So this is what we've been talking about this morning. The brain develops from the brainstem up to right behind your eyebrows to the prefrontal cortex, where those executive functions are developing through young adulthood. And in the limbic area, where you will see threat appraisal, this is that area of the amygdala, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. And so this is the area, if we are functioning in fight, flight, shutdown, it turns off the prefrontal cortex. The brainstem is really the grand central station. It's the oldest part of the brain, and the brainstem is more often than not developed before birth or at birth. And so it's that ancient response that doesn't tell time, and it's the seat of all the things that we do autonomically and automatically. So it is where we have heart rate and digestion and respiration and sleep rhythms. And so we're born being able to do those or to have those experiences without thinking about them. But also the brainstem is the seat of where external stimuli and internal stimuli come in. And sometimes we hear a loud crashing sound and our heart starts to beat. Our phone goes off in the middle of the night. It's on loud. And what's the first thing we do? Literally, our body jerks. So we have a brainstem reaction or lower brain area reaction. And so that sends a signal to limbic structures that activates the amygdala, the smoke detector, and then we've got this activated, elevated stress response. So this is developing, and adversity and trauma can compromise the development of these very important structures in early years. I'm going to skip through a few of these slides because some of these are reiterating what I've already talked about, but stress has an immediate impact on our unconscious mind. And I talked about that the very first slide, triggering sensations that don't make sense in the present moment. It can keep us living in the past, trauma and adversity. It avoids the present moment. It obsesses about the future. That's why we feel so unsafe. And we can't change parts of the brains that's not activated. In order to change the brain state, you must activate that state. And this is Dr. Bruce Perry's work. And I love this. He uses the analogy that if you want to learn how to play the piano, you can't read a book about playing the piano, and you can't watch a YouTube about the piano. You have to put your hands on the keys. And it's the same thing with meeting our clients, our patients, our students where they are. That's why procedures and routines and structure and predictability are so important and good for all students. Every single one of these strategies that I'm talking about today are so important for every single student in the classroom. And so we build these strategies in through meeting kids where they are. If a child comes in rough, then we are going to not talk and start teaching. We are going to do a focused attention practice, or we're going to give the student an opportunity for a sensation that feels good. Maybe as they come in, they can take some hand lotion, scented or unscented, and give themselves a hand massage as they're unpacking their backpack, or as they're walking in and getting ready for the day. Maybe they need to go to the amygdala area that we're using in our homes and classrooms to hold something that feels soft to them, or to put on some headphones for 5 minutes, to listen to some music, to grab a peppermint, we use a little bit of lavender and some of the other aromatherapies or essential oils on cotton balls. So we use the first few minutes at the beginning of the day to prime the brain and get that brain ready for learning. So, and I will talk more about those in the breakout session. So this is what we've been talking about today. The brain is built from brainstem to cortex. And so the brainstem is asking, am I safe? The limbic structure is about connection and attachment and asking, am I felt? Am I loved? And once those lower brain regions are integrated and organized, then a child can access, or any of us can access, the prefrontal cortex. And then we're asking, okay, what can I learn? What can I create? What can I begin to understand? So all chronic behavioral issues, chronic. I'm not talking about a child who's stressing for a day or has a bad week. But when we see chronic behavioral issues, those are regulation issues, which are physiological issues. And that is the shift in this new lens for discipline. The language of the brainstem is sensation. The language of the limbic system is feelings. And the language of the cortex is words. We know that the greatest time of brain development occurs in the first 2 years of life. It is in utero through year 2, and the brain is wiring up. Just crazy connections between neurons are happening at enormous rates. And so we see that in the first 2 years of life, that because the brain is wiring up, those experiences stick to the brain like Velcro. And our best estimate is that a child's brain is 90% of adult weight by 5 years of age. So it's never about the number of neurons in the brain. It's about the connections that are forming. And that's why those early experiences impact the brain so greatly, because that brain's, the stickiness, for lack of a better word, of the brain in that time. Dr. Jim Bean is a pediatrician we work with, and so he has shared these slides with us. So you can see by age 24 months that this child, look at the connections that are forming. I mean, these connections are just really, really thickening. So any experiences, I love this analogy. It's like the child is like a digital recorder in the first few years of life, because we don't have the executive functions to think that this is good for me or to think this isn't good for me. But again, it is the brain wires from the back to the front and from the inside out. So if those experiences are toxic, or if those experiences are filled with a lot of adversity, then we are going to see a brain that really becomes hardwired in those survival areas of the brain. And then you can see the brain begins to prune away connections after that, the greatest time of connection. And the adolescent brain, and this is why when I went back to the schools 6 years ago, I chose 5th grade, because it's the second greatest time of development. That adolescent brain begins pruning away or consolidating connections starting around 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Again, it's not a definitive time because development is chaotic. It's not linear. But starting around that upper elementary, middle school through high school, we see the brain go through its second greatest time of brain development. And that is when that brain is getting ready for young adulthood. So it's literally consolidating connections it's no longer using, and it's creating connections based on the experiences that child is having, which seems, when I think about that and I tell my fifth graders, at 10 or 11 or 12 years old, you've got a very developed amygdala or limbic area. So your ability to be ornery and inappropriate and impulsive and ridiculously inappropriate is so appropriate, because this part of the brain has not developed, and we need experiences to develop that. So I say to my fifth graders, you tell me you want to play soccer. You tell me that you want to play professional football, you want to dance, you want to be a doctor, you want to do whatever. But what are you doing now at 10 or 11 years old? Because your brain will never, ever again be as malleable or plastic as it is at 10 years old. And we talk about that in the fifth grade. That's how I open up August with my fifth graders, is that we talk about how important it is to provide your brain experiences right now, because that brain learns through patterned, repetitive experiences. So 3 conditions that the brain cannot take. And those conditions are chronic unpredictability, isolation, and restraint. And so what we understand is that the antithesis of these conditions that keep that brain locked up in survival, chronic unpredictability, is we meet the child or the adolescent or our client with more predictability, more routine, check-ins, chunking what we ask them to do, and then giving frequent feedback. It's very important to give that child or adolescent, just a small chunk of what you are needing, and then this is scaffolding, and then to be able to come back and give that feedback continuously. The antithesis of isolation is connection, so we amp up touch points in our classrooms and schools, And then restraint, the body is built to move. The body is built to have emotional and physical movement. So that's what I mean by more yeses. Maybe we pick and choose our battles, and we give that student an opportunity to make more choices. And that feels calming and regulating to the brain. I love this slide because it shows, we share this with our students, that the amygdala really resembles a chihuahua, and that it is our threat detection system. It's our emotional smoke detector. The other area of the brain that is impacted, many areas are. So again, I'm oversimplifying this, but we know that when a young child faces emotional adversity, the hippocampus works with the amygdala. They function together, and the hippocampus is the seat of short-term memory, visual, spatial, emotional memory. So when a child is feeling chronically overwhelmed by adversity, then it's very difficult to remember and to learn. And so this area of the brain, the hippocampus, neuroscience, the researchers and scientists have seen cell atrophy in this area of the brain, but they've also seen neurogenesis. So this is brand new research, but we know it's impacted by trauma and adversity. And it also is impacted by relationships and resiliency. So important to understand as we work with our children. I'm going to go through, just skip through a few of these because I'm getting short on time, but this is a really important quote that I love and I've stressed, I hope, this morning. Repeated and overwhelming stress sensitizes the amygdala and it becomes hyper alert to danger. Troubled children reset their normal level of arousal, even when no external threats exist. They are in a persistent state of alarm. This is Dr. Bruce Perry's work. And I think I mentioned that at the beginning. A sound, a smell, a piece of clothing, an experience that seems completely unrelated to the present moment can really throw any of us into that hypersensitive state of, am I safe? Is this familiar? When can I get out of here? I mean, these are questions that the survival brain is asking. Troubled children are distinguished by their regrettable ability to elicit from others exactly the opposite of what they really need. And the central challenge facing us as adults working with children with significant adversity is dealing with their primary pain without inflicting secondary pain. And we don't mean to, but traditional discipline works the best with the children who need it the least. And that's true in our homes and it's true in our schools. We've got to address the primary pain, the signal beneath the behavior, as Dr. Delahook speaks about. And we've got to address connection and safety before anything else. Human beings are contagious. Our feelings are contagious, our motor movements, and our cognition is contagious. And this is a huge part of the social neurobiology that produces this type of positive contagion or negative contagion. Kids in stress create in adults their feelings, and if not trained, the adults will mirror that behavior. How many times have I, as a mom, escalated, jumped into the power struggle, jumped into the conflict with my own children and with my students because I wasn't calm and I hadn't taken some deep breaths before I addressed, and we used words and we talked about consequences, or we talked about how do we solve this together. So I'm going to share a couple of strategies as I end this keynote today, but I want to share that we use this in classrooms and schools, in your offices, and we teach kids about this graph. In the green area is where you are feeling calm and regulated. It's your social engagement system. It's where we have a regulated heart rate, our blood pressure is stable, we're feeling calm and relaxed, and we're feeling safe. Most of us will function where you see this purple-blue line, because oftentimes throughout the day, several times a day, we'll get a phone call that will annoy us. We'll get a text that will irritate or worry us. So we bump up into that yellow area where we might feel discomfort or we're unhappy. But most of us find a balance between social engagement and fight-flight. Many of our children and adolescents are walking in with a new normal. It is that hyper-arousal state where they are functioning, their purple-blue line is functioning on the edge of the red and the blue. And so this produces very different behaviors, but we're teaching this neurobiology to the kids. And this really goes with so many of the programs that are out there too, but we're using the language of science. So when you're up into your amygdala, which is in the reddish orange area, your heart rate goes up, your respiration goes up, and your blood pressure goes up. That's fight flight. And the blue area is more of, it's a different pathway. It's different than fight flight. It's where we move into a frozen or dissociative, chronically dissociative state. Because dissociation, we all do, that's daydreaming. So dissociation isn't bad, but it's when it's chronic, where we feel numb, where we shut down, where we're conserving our energy just to stay alive. So this is, and our kids are coming in and they can actually, we made these little brains out of paper. They can put their, they can be anonymous, or your clients come in, but they actually are moving these back and forth and showing what brain state they're in throughout a class period or throughout the day. And I'm going to skip through a couple of these. I'm going to come back, but I want to show you a simplified one. I think it's in here that we did for our students right here. So this is really cool. This is the one you just saw, but it's simplified for younger children. So some of the words are cut off, but we associate words and sensations, feelings and sensations with brain state. So we're just talking about brain state. Are we calm? Are we in our cortex? Did we move up to the amygdala in fight flight? Or have we downshifted into our brainstem in shutdown dissociative? And it really helps the students to name the state that they're in rather than focusing on a behavior or a feeling. It's empowering and it feels relieving to the students. So I apologize for moving back and forth, but I want to show you a couple of other you are going to be receiving this. This is a resource on the right that my colleague and co-instructor and graduate student Courtney Boyle has shared with literally, these are the strategies that we have been collecting that are sensory and emotional and cortical strategies for children and adults, for all of us to use. And so I threw at her like 10 or 12 Word documents of all the applications and the strategies that I had been implementing and researching over the past 7 years. And so a couple of weeks ago, God love Courtney, she put them all together so that you can see we've got the brainstem, the regulatory sensory strategies, we've got connection strategies, increasing touch points, and then we've got cortical strategies that helps our clients and children to name what they contain. This is as much for adults as it is for children. So this will be a resource. It's 30 pages. We're going to be adding to it, but I want all of you to have this after the conference, and I'll be sending this to Barb too. So these are for younger children. I have been working at St. Mary's Early Childhood Center in Indianapolis for the past 2.5 years. I've been working with their teachers and with their staff and modeling some co-regulatory practices for our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And so Courtney joined me this past semester, and we created regulatory practices for our younger children, and we associated those with animals, because just like music, animals is a universal language. And these are good for older kids too. You could bonify these, but we will be able to share these with you too. These are the regulation cards that we're using for sensory regulation, that use movement, that use breath, that use we use tapping, we use touch and pressure and smell, all of the things that we know can calm us from a body or sensory origination. And I talked about hand lotion. Giving ourselves a nice hand massage is very calming and regulating to our nervous system and to our brains and bodies. We've created amygdala areas in our classrooms, and also right now during this pandemic, many staff have shared that parents are creating little areas in their home that show amygdala areas. These amygdala areas are spaces that the students and the teachers can create together, or families can create, where we bring in some objects, some of the child's favorite or some of the adults. I mean, I think adult amygdala areas are fabulous. Some things that you would like in your amygdala area that help you to feel calm. So these are just some pictures from some of the schools that have shared that with us. And I'm going to come back to this slide for the breakout session, but I want to end this keynote showing you this slide because it's really, really exciting. Many of our children coming from significant adversity do not have an IEP or a 504. Yet they need accommodations that are sensory and attachment focused. So this is called an accommodation template through the ACEs lens. And this will support our children where the adults who work beside our children and youth are consistent. So we don't hesitate to give children accommodations who need reading or math accommodations. But we certainly have never really thought about how important it is to give children who come in rough chronically and dysregulated some sensory accommodations or some touch points that they can use. Is there an adult, or are there two people in the school that this child trusts that they can go to if they are starting to amp up and starting to feel worried or anxious or reaching that point of no return? So I will send this to Barb too. This is an accommodation template for all of you to have. And again, it can be modified. It can be used in any way that you would like to use it. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to come back to these practices for the breakout session, but I want to give you all my contact information. And again, I just have so much to share, and I never get through all of it, but that's okay. Please reach out to me through social media. You can see my Twitter is here, Desautels _PhD. My Butler email is here. Please reach out and email me at Butler. Follow me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And I wanted to share with you, I just jumped into this presentation because I was nervous that it was going to record, but my background is in special education, and I worked also at Methodist Hospital on the adolescent psychiatric unit years ago before I went to Marian University, and before then, 4 years ago, I came to Butler. But I share this with you because it became critical for me to come back into the classroom to be able to do this work. I love higher ed. I love teaching undergraduate students and graduate students, but I learned that I was not walking the walk. And I can tell you 6 years ago when I entered into the classroom, which I still am in the classroom a couple of times a week, moving semester to semester to different grade levels, it's changed everything for me, because some days these practices and strategies work well and other days they don't, but I'm there to help modify those strategies and practices that have, that we need to tweak a little bit. So I can't thank you all enough. I am just so honored to have shared this virtually with you. And please reach out to me at any time. And I will be back recording a breakout session going into detail with so many of the strategies. So thank you all for all that you do. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay peaceful, and please reach out to me, at any time. So thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Brooke Schaefer. Brooke Schaefer, nurse practitioner, is the director of the Choice Program, a treatment program through Community Health Network for pregnant women with substance abuse disorders. The Choice Program encompasses the themes of change, hope, overcome, inspire, compassion, and educate. Brooke was born and raised in Lafayette, Indiana. A lifetime Boilermaker, she did her parents proud by going to Purdue University. She graduated after an extended super senior year with no idea of what she was going to do with her life. She went back to nursing school at Marian University in Indianapolis and graduated cum laude. Brooke and her husband Josh enjoy flea markets and CrossFit. They and their 4 children live on a small farm in central Indiana where Brooke focuses on gardening and raising animals that have no purpose in life but to provide entertainment. Please welcome Brooke Schaefer.
Hello, I'm Brooke Schaefer. I am a nurse practitioner for Community Health Network. I am a nurse practitioner, and I also am the director for perinatal substance use disorders for Community Health Network throughout the entire region. So what that means is that I am in charge of making sure that every single woman in the entire state who works with Community Health Network has the resources that she needs to be successful in her personal goals for recovery. I work with all of our different hospitals, but I'm also always available for consults with any hospital. Community Health is not trying to have the most women in our program. It's not a competition. There's no market share. Ooh, I'm looking at my hair, seeing things go crazy. So I am definitely available for consultation. Of course, that's free of charge, just to help these women have their best possible outcomes. We do keep a really close tab on any resources that are available throughout the state. So sometimes we're just nice to talk to if you're dealing with a patient, client, friend, family member, and you feel like you need a little assistance with that, finding them the resources they need to be successful. I'm going to give you my email address right now, and you can always reach me on that email address. I do check it very frequently. So my email address is BSCHAEFER, so B Schaefer, but note that Schaefer is spelled a little different. And that's at the letter E, community.com. So again, B Schaefer at ecommunity.com. And you can always rewind and write that down again if you ever have any questions for me. I'd love to hear from you. Also, that's a great place to send me any questions, comments, worries, concerns that you have about my presentation here today. So for today, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about biases, how those biases come up in life, how to deal with them, and how to really keep a close connection with your biases. I always grew up thinking I had no biases, and that in itself was a bias. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, and we'll get started here. But again, I'm Brooke Schaefer, nurse practitioner with the Community Health Network, and we are going to be talking today about bias. All right, so let's move on to our next slide. Conflicts of interest in this presentation. Again, you guys will have access to this PowerPoint. Forgive my setup. I'm literally in my master bedroom. During COVID, of course, we're all learning to work from home and doing things a little differently than we have in the past. So I am trying to do this from the TV that's in my bedroom. And so if you can't read it, please note that I will make sure the slides are available as well. Okay, this setup is probably about as good as it gets. And there's absolutely no way that one of my children is not going to interrupt this presentation while I'm talking to you. So again, conflict of interest. My only conflict is that I work for Community Health Network, and I'm a big fan of Community Health Network. So I want to jump right in with biases. Guys, my particular specialty is that I work with pregnant women who have substance use disorders. These women encounter an intense amount of biases in their life. Every day, everywhere they go. They get bias from their family. They get bias from the pharmacy. I have never, as a white middle-class woman, I have not encountered a lot of discrimination in my life. Maybe a little bit for being a woman, but not really, because I work in healthcare, and I feel like in healthcare, women don't get discriminated against as staff quite as often as women do in other professions. So I'm not really familiar with bias. When I encounter personal discrimination, I'm confused by it. I love my patients desperately, and I take anyone who discriminates against them as someone who's discriminating against my people, me. So when my patients are discriminated against, particularly in pharmacies, they encounter a lot of discrimination. I lose my temper. I become, how should I say it nicer? I heard it said at a conference once, I become non-professional in my passion. That's exactly right. I kind of lose my nurse practitioner mode and turn it into crazy, you did not talk to my friend like that mode. I joke too that as a middle-class white woman, I'm really good at throwing a fit, right? You know, you see the memes for the Karen character who's got like the short hair and then the big on top, and she's always like, my Starbucks coffee is not hot enough and I want to talk to your manager. I could turn into that person. I have that in me. And when a pharmacy is discriminating against my patients, I get pretty dramatic on the phone with them. You may be thinking to yourself, how would a pharmacy discriminate against a patient? That's ridiculous. That's not real. That's what I thought at first, too. Until I had a particular situation where I called a pharmacist and said, my patient's standing at the counter. She calls me on her cell phone. She says, here, to the pharmacist, take my phone, talk to my practitioner. Pharmacist says, I can't do it that way. I have to call them independently because I don't know who's on the other end of that phone. Okay, that's fair. Okay, I'll give him that one. Then I got on the phone with him. And I said to the pharmacist, my patient says that I wrote her a prescription for 10 buprenorphine tablets. She says that you're telling her you have 12 of them in stock and you won't give her 10. She has no transportation. And right now we are actually lucky in our choice program that we have a grant for transportation. So I don't have to worry about transportation for my patients anymore. We can just give them Ubers everywhere. But this was back before we had that option. And I said, listen, this patient has no transportation. She cannot come back to you in 3 days. She needs to get her week's worth of medication, which is 10 tablets, which you have in stock. Please explain to me why you won't give them to her. The pharmacist said, well, if I give her 10, I'll only have 2 left. I said, yes, I realize that 12 minus 10 equals 2. What's the problem? Well, if I only have 2 left, what will I do for the next person that needs it? Well, you can order them pills because she was there first and she gets her medication now. The pharmacist said, yeah, but then I'll only have 2 left. And I said, listen, I've heard you tell me several times what 12 minus 10 is. Please don't tell me that again. I understand the math. Please give her 10 tablets. And then the pharmacist, this is the pharmacist, says to me, you realize that she's pregnant, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm her OB nurse practitioner as well as her substance use disorder treatment nurse practitioner. I am completely aware that she's pregnant. I've looked at ultrasounds of her baby. That's why I want her on Subutex. Give her the medicine. Well, I'm not going to be able to give them to her. And I said, all right, then I want to talk to your manager. And so I go into that. I'm going to talk to your manager if you won't give me what I want mode, which worked because eventually I did get the pharmacist to give her the medication. But that discrimination of a woman with a substance use disorder who's pregnant, who's trying to get a certain medication, that's a bias that pharmacist had against this patient. Now, I'm sure every single one of you can think of a bias that has happened in your life. I'm positive you can think of them immediately. Hopefully not very many of them have happened to you personally, but you can think about when they've happened to your friends, patients, peers. And they're unacceptable. They, to me, feel like an injustice that must be fought at all costs. It's unacceptable. So, I want to talk to you drug addicts. Addicts is a word that I don't use. It's a word that I refuse. I don't like it. But my patients use that word a lot. I say people in recovery or people with a substance use disorder because I feel like addict has such a connotation with it that I don't like to use that word. Now, I'm not a super hypersensitive person about words. I don't think. I use a lot of bad words, a lot. If you've ever met me, you have heard me probably say the F word. I don't mince my language very delicately, but I don't like words that put stigma on people. And I feel like the word addict does. I'm going to use it for the sake of this, but I want you to understand that word a little bit when you use it. So I want you to think about if you hear somebody say the phrase pregnant drug addict. Okay? What does that make you think? Think for a minute, how does that make you feel? You're hopefully at home, tucked in safely with your family or your pets or your family and your pets. And I want you to just take a second to think about what does that word make you feel? Write it down. Put a mental note in your head. Think for a minute, what's a word that comes to mind when you think about a pregnant drug addict? These are a lot of the words that I get. Disgust, anger, frustration, pity, hatred, revulsion. I'm not going to read them all. Y'all can read. But you get an idea of what I'm talking about. These are words that people put on these women that are words that have a lot of hatred in them, a lot of pity, not sympathy. A lot of stigma in that. And then I want you to think about what biases do you hold about these women. So when you think about biases specifically, be thinking about what does this woman look like? Make a cartoon of her in your head. She's this, skinny, no teeth, looks rough, dirty hair, dressed inappropriate for the weather, whatever. All these different things you can come up with of this stigma of what this woman looks like. But I'll tell you that one of the biases that these women get that are really hard for them to overcome is they get the bias, the label, a bad mom put on them. And that's a very, very difficult stigma for them to come through and for them to see past. So I'm not going to focus this entire presentation on pregnant women with substance use disorders. I could, because I love to talk about that subject. But I will try to focus on a little bit broader of bias itself. So, briefly, I want to bring up this one point. These are some Facebook comments that were placed in a public forum. These comments are, again, public information. So these people, I do not protect their names because they didn't care about protecting their names. So here's what they're talking about pregnant drug women who have a substance use disorder. If you're on drugs of any kind, don't bring life into this world. Get yourself fixed. And that our government should do mandatory birth control. The end. So this person's in charge of mandatory birth control. Mandatory sterilization under a certain age. No drugged up babies or babies born to incompetent mothers. So this person thinks that we have to be tested before we can have children. all the babies should be taken away from women who have substance use disorders, and not give the parents a chance to get them back. Even if they get in recovery, even if they are totally stable, they should not be allowed to have their kids back. It's become way too common. If nothing's done about it, we're all going to burn. Yeah. Let me tell you, this sort of attitude is exactly what's wrong with the world. Here's a few more comments. These drug addict females should be spayed. So spayed. The word spayed means a mandatory hysterectomy that's against your will. Very Handmaid's Tale comment right here. The child should be take the child off her and remove her insides. Okay. What the hell is wrong with people? We need to sterilize these women. If you have a child that's addicted to drugs because you are, that should be an automatic felony. She thinks we need to put all those women in jail. Yeah. Let me tell you something. Tennessee tried that. They tried to make it illegal to use drugs while you were pregnant. You got put in jail if you used while you were pregnant. You know what happened? I want you to think for a minute. If you are trying as hard as you can to come off substances, but you can't, and you know that if you seek care and get a drug screen that shows substances, you're going to be put in jail, what would you do? Hide from care. So then these women weren't getting any prenatal care at all, which meant they were getting no treatment, which meant they were getting zero assistance, and your chance of being successful without treatment is about 10%. So our biases were affecting their medical care directly, and then their recovery from their substance use disorders. I know. I said I wasn't going to go on and on about substance use disorders in pregnant women. I swear I'm going to move on. Well, a little. I'll probably talk about it again. So let's talk a little bit about bias itself, just bias in general. Listen, bias is inevitable. There's absolutely no way that you cannot have some biases. You have biases. Even if you are just the absolute most open-minded person in the universe, you have some biases, things that you believe to be true. They can be for or against a group. So you may have a bias that certain racial groups are smarter than other racial groups, or you may have a bias that certain racial groups are less intelligent. You may have a bias that certain genders are smarter than other genders. This biases occur in all aspects of life. Think about brand. I want to talk about brands, okay? Right now, I'm struggling, and this is like total first world problems, to find the brand of bread that I like. I'm really picky about the brand of bread that I like. Now, I'm not going to 6 different stores because I'm trying to be good, but when I find the bread I like, I buy, 3 loaves. That's a bias. There are probably other breads that taste just like my stupid bread does, but that's the bread I want. That's my bias. I'm calling it my preference, but it's also a bias. Biases are controllable. They really are controllable, especially if you're aware of them. The big thing with bias, though, is that it can be subconscious. You might not even know that you have a bias that you're not aware exists in your subconscious. So your biases can be totally, I'm not going to say out of your control, you're not aware of them to be able to control them. When we're talking about biases as to whether they're controllable or not controllable, I want you to think about 2 different kinds of bias. Implicit bias and explicit bias. Implicit bias is bias that may not even be in your conscious mind. It's bias, I've heard it described before as like, if I say peanut butter and your brain automatically thinks of the word jelly, that's an implicit bias that you have towards peanut butter. There's a great video online. If you look up implicit bias, peanut butter and jelly, it'll go through that in more detail. I don't want to show it to you today because you can Google it and watch it yourself if you're interested in learning more. But that implicit bias is something I say it's sneaky. It's hidden. It's not right there in your face screaming at you. Implicit bias is loud. It's an active intent. I have a bias towards pregnant women with substance use disorder that's implicit. I think they're capable of recovery. Every single one of them. That's a bias that I have towards them. I think it's right, but I'm obviously a little biased towards these women because I love them. So implicit bias is loud and clear. I obviously am biased towards my children. I think they absolutely hung the moon. They're all complete geniuses. They are the most musically talented people that exist on this planet. And my son is the best football player that ever walked the earth. Why? Because I'm his mom, right? And your mom is always supposed to be your biggest fan. So implicit bias is loud and clear, is direct, is conscious, is active. Implicit is a sneaky little bugger. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some things that I have learned and about these. And I really want to focus on which one of these is worse. You're entitled to your opinion, of course. You can say whatever you want because I can't even hear you right now, so you do you. But I'm here to tell you, I'm scared of implicit bias. I'm scared of implicit bias affecting how I treat my patients, because if I don't know that I'm being biased towards them, how can I not be biased towards them? I think I'm just doing the right thing. So implicit bias to me is quite scary. I want to talk about implicit bias, and I want to give you an example. So here's a link to the data about this. But when you're talking about white patients versus black patients, when you're giving pain medication, black patients were 40% less likely to receive medication to ease acute pain. So I believe this study, if I'm remembering correctly, was done in the emergency department, and it had to do with acute pain. So you walk in, cut off your finger, I don't know. I worked in the ER, and man, I was gonna use teeth as an example, but teeth are so gross, I can't deal with teeth. You can hand me your severed arm, and I would be like, hello, sir, let's get you to the back and get you some help. You hand me a tooth, I'm gonna jump back from it and refuse to touch it. Teeth freak me out. I'm off on a tangent, let's focus. So you come in with acute pain. I'll let you imagine a scenario that has to do with acute pain. If you are white, you're much more likely to get pain medication. If you are black, you are 40% less likely to get pain medication. If you're Hispanic, you're 25% less likely to get pain medication. Man, that's insane. That's unacceptable bias. And they actually found some data that showed that physicians, this was not about nurse practitioners, this particular study was just about physicians. Physicians reported that African American patients had higher pain tolerance. Like they believed that African American patient had thicker skin, higher pain tolerance than white patients for no reason. So it's very interesting data just on that fact alone, that you're not going around being racist saying, I hate black people. It's not some crazy thing like that. It's this subconscious, when you go to write the prescription, you're just not going to give one to a black patient. And it's a subconscious bias, an implicit bias. Being aware of our biases helps us fight them. We can't fight them if we don't know about them. I have to tell you that when I was in grad school to become a nurse practitioner, I was taking a class that made us take this extensively long quiz on what were our biases. And I was biased against the quiz because I thought it was so boring that I was going to die. Well, when the quiz results came back, it would tell you, hey, listen, this doesn't mean you're racist. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means that you have some biases that you need to think about, be conscious of, and get past. All right? My bias, so keep in mind, remember what I do for a living. I am a women's nurse practitioner with substance use disorder, right? That's all I do. That's all I do. My bias is for white, overweight men who are over 30. So not young men. White, chubby, older men. Older meaning over 30, not young. Lucky for me, I ended up in a job where I don't have to take care of those patients. But it did make me think while I was in grad school about being really careful. When I take care of those patients, I get this automatic surge in the very deep, dark back recesses of my brain that says, you need to get it together. Listen, if you are going to have a BMI of 45 and eat donuts all day and never work out and eat cheeseburgers constantly, you just can't act surprised that your diabetes is out of control. It's a simple equation here. And I felt myself feel that way with those patients a lot. I don't feel that way with my patients. A pregnant woman with substance use disorder, I never think in my head, you just need to stop doing drugs and get it together. Because I know it's not that simple. But with a overweight white man over the age of 30, that's not the thought that comes to my mind immediately. And so whenever I was taking care of those patients in grad school, and if for some reason things change and I'm taking care of those patients again, I need to be conscious of that. I need to really think about the fact that I kind of have a low tolerance for that, and I need to be more sensitive to those patients when I take care of them in the future, if I ever do. All right, guys. So a bias that I want to talk to you about is some bias that I have about deodorant. Okay? This was something I did not know. So when you get a new thing of deodorant, I'm using my husband's because I don't have any brand new ones, and I'm not going to the store just for this because that is not good social distance consciousness. So when you get a new deodorant, when it comes to you, it has this little plastic thing in it, right? And so my entire life, I've grabbed this with my hands and tried to pull this out. And it didn't always work. And so sometimes I grab it with my teeth and try to pull it out. Super great move, right? One day, my husband and I were in our bathroom together, and he was getting ready in the morning, and all he did was roll the bottom of his deodorant tube, and then the little dude comes out himself. Oh. Now, there's a lot of people on this call right now who are going, yeah, no duh, how else would you get the deodorant out? But I promise you, there is someone on this call right now who's saying, oh, darn it, I never thought of that. That is a great illustration of bias. Thinking that I knew everything there was to know about opening a deodorant container because I've used deodorant my whole life. And well, of course I know how to use deodorant. I'm 42 years old. I've used deodorant since I was like 12. I've got deodorant figured out, right? Oh, except the thing on the top, if you just twist the bottom, it'll come out. Oops. Bias. So my bias with deodorant is comical and obviously somewhat ridiculous, but I want to talk to you about some biases that I grew up with that I didn't know about. My parents were two very highly educated people, two very open-minded people. My father is 10 years older than my mother. He would have grown up in the 50s. My mother would have grown up in the 60s. Good, solid, upstanding citizens. Now, here's some biases that I came out of my house with. These may not have been intentional biases that they sent to me, but these are what I grew up with. The first one was that racism did not exist anymore. So again, I was born in 77. I grew up primarily in the 80s. I was in college in the 90s. That was kind of my era, okay? Big hair, grunge, and then whatever happened after grunge was kind of a vague time. All right, so I grew up thinking that racism did not exist. I was probably in college before I saw any actual racism against anyone. My parents always made it clear to us that racism was something that only very backward hillbilly, basically white trash would have been the phrase that we would have used. That white trash would have been racist, but that's it. Nobody else was ever racist. And even they were mostly not racist. So it was almost a myth. We had sort of bred racism out of our culture. It didn't exist really anymore. So we didn't need to be worried about racism because it wasn't a real thing. Obviously, there's some pretty big problems with that. You're probably thinking, why didn't I know about racism in high school? I went to a very bizarre high school that was 2 blocks from Purdue's campus. It was all college professors' kids and grad students' kids. It was extremely ethnically diverse. It was extremely open-minded, super liberal. I mean, even in the early 90s, we had openly gay students. We had it was a very, very different kind of high school in that time zone than most high schools. So racism was absolutely not a thing. I mean, we had everybody from every religion, from every race, from every part of the world. And it was just not real. Racism didn't exist in that particular little micro civilization, all right? Obviously, outside of that, it was happening. I just didn't know about it. I was in college before I really knew that there was actually true racism. And then I started going, wait, what? No. Like, it was so ridiculous that I couldn't even digest it. It felt so impossible. This was definitely something we were taught. If you don't make it, meaning if you are not successful, it's your own fault. It's 100% your own fault. You just didn't try hard enough. If you hadn't been so lazy, you would have made it. And we heard this all the time in my house. Now, I'm a nurse practitioner. My sister is a professor of engineering, and my brother is a self-made millionaire who owns the largest contact lens distributing company in Europe. Okay, we all did pretty well with this amount of pressure put on us. We also came from a peaceful, supportive, nurturing childhood. And I'll talk more about that in a second. We are all 100% created equal. I felt like that was true for a long time in my life until I realized that my friends who grew up in foster care, who were abused significantly throughout their lives, did not come at life from the same nurturing place that I came at life. So we're not all 100% created equal. Maybe created as in human in the womb created. Okay. But once we get out and the world starts to go at us, we aren't all created equal. And I ran into this all the time, especially in my family where everybody was so damn smart. And I was wicked not the smartest of the whole family. And don't go, oh, Brooke, you're smart. Look, I'm fine with me. I'm of average intelligence for my peers. My sister and brother are geniuses, as are my parents. So being in that genius, the upper category, and being of average intelligence, we were not all created equal. I promise you. So we are not all created equal, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you can't do great things, even if you have if you have to. So now, this was one that I was definitely taught. Depressed people are weak and they have a character deficit. Oh, God. 42-year-old me thinks back on 18-year-old me, and we fight all the time. So past me and current me are always like, the hell were you thinking? 18-year-old me is like, oh my God, you are so uncool in your minivan. And 42-year-old me is like, ooh, it has automatic doors. This is so awesome, right? So we fight, 18-year-old me and 42-year-old me. 42-year-old me is like embarrassed for 18-year-old me because 18-year-old me didn't say it out loud, I hope, but 18-year-old me thought and had been taught that mental health, short of major mental health disorders like schizophrenia, that depression specifically was a weakness. You just need to try harder. You just need to get your ass out of that bed and get to work and get it figured out. And I know now it's not that easy. I understand better that people who struggle with depression, it's not that simple. But that was an implicit bias that I had in my brain that I had to very consciously look at, work through, and kick out for being just ridiculous. Unacceptable. Unacceptable 18-year-old me. I think that about her all the time. She did a lot of stuff that was unacceptable. So I want to talk to you about the concept of we're all created equal. And when I say that, again, I'm not talking about from birth. I'm talking about at age 5. Are we all equal at age 5? Is the 5-year-old that grew up with severe abuse, trauma, neglect equal to 5-year-old me who was just like playing with Barbies and at this time of year would have just been out? I used to do this every spring. It's a hand to God. I used to go out every spring and count the crocuses in our yard because I was very worried that there would always be the same number of crocuses every year. Obviously a little bit of, but that was like my biggest deal, was how many crocuses came in the spring. That's the intensity of my life as a child. Peaceful, right? So let's talk about trauma. I really hope that you have heard of ACE scoring before, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, okay? If you haven't, I would highly recommend that you click on the link that's coming right there. Boom. Click on this link at the bottom of this slide, and it's through the NPR, and I really want you to just look at that, and I really urge you to ACE score yourself. When you do ACE scoring, what you're looking at is what kind of abuse occurred in your childhood, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Then you're also looking at what kind of neglect occurred in your childhood, physical or emotional neglect. And then you're also looking at the dysfunction of your household. Listen, everybody's household has some dysfunction, right? I really hope when my kids grow up, their dysfunction is more funny than anything serious, because as far as I know, right now it's just comical dysfunction in our household. But let's look at these. There's mental illness, incarcerated relative, a mother treated violently, substance abuse, or a divorce. So even a divorce counts as an ACE score, all right? That's pretty significant. All right, friends, so we've been talking about ACE scoring. It's something I want to talk to you about. It's something that we don't think about a lot in our society. I know that when DCS removes a child from a mother's care, they have very good reasons to do it. I am not doubting that for a second. But something that I deal with in substance use disorder treatment is that I'm constantly educating people about what it means for that baby to remove it from its mother. So I want to work with you here real quickly if we can. And we are going to work through. So guys, when we remove a child from the care of the mother, what we have to be thinking about here is the ACE score itself. I want you to understand, and I'm going to talk to you in more detail about what ACE score elevations mean for someone. But first, let's look at this. So before you're 8, let's say that this mother is living with this child, and this child, when they grow up, does not feel they were abused or neglected by this mother. All right, so let's see. On your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in your household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or hurt you? So we're going to say for this child, no. Before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw anything at you, or ever hit you so hard you had made marks? Again, this child would answer no. Before your 18th birthday, did an adult or person at least 5 years or older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch or fondle them in a sexual way, or attempt to have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? No. Before your 18th birthday, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important, or your family didn't look at each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? So for the sake of this exercise, we're going to say no. Before your 18th birthday, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you? Before your 18th birthday, was a biological parent ever lost to you through divorce, abandonment, or another reason? So we're going to say yes, because this child was removed from their mother. Before your 18th birthday, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? We're going to say no, but I would say that this probably would not have been how this child had grown up if they were living in this house. Before your 18th birthday, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs? So we're going to say yes, because this mom has a substance use disorder. Before your 18th birthday, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member ever attempt suicide? So I feel like I'm going to say yes to this one, because if this child was removed, we're going to call mental illness part of substance use disorder. I may be going on a jump with that, but you go with me on this journey. Did a household member go to prison? So we're going to say yes on this, because the baby was removed from the mom. I feel that we can assume that there was some substance use disorder there, and that possibly there was legal interaction. So I'm just going to say yes on that one, because I feel like that's not a big leap. So that gives this baby an ACE score of 4. Again, you can go to this website, and I'll show you the link here, npr.org, and take the ACE quiz. Just Google this, take the ACE quiz on NPR. You take the ACE quiz for yourself, and I want you to find out what your scores are. With our looking into the ACE score on a baby that's removed from a mother. So that's an infant. Let's say that's less than a 1-year-old. That baby already has an ACE score of 4. That is not changeable. You can't go back and alter your ACE score. So already that 1-year-old child has an ACE score of 4. Okay? If your ACE score is 4 or over, you have a way higher risk of injury, of having mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder. You have a much higher risk of an unintended pregnancy, pregnancy complications, and you have a way higher risk of having a baby that dies, of a uterine pregnancy that dies, a fetus that dies. You have a way higher chance of having HIV or STDs. You have a way higher chance of chronic illnesses like cancer and diabetes. You have a way higher chance of risky behaviors like alcohol and drug abuse. And you have way lower chance of having a good education, a good occupation, and a good income. Because your ACE score was a 4 as a 1-year-old. Affects your whole long-term outcomes. That's crazy. That's why I think that treatment for the mothers, the families, is so essential, because even if that child had no physical abuse, sexual abuse, like the baby was fed and watered, but mom had a substance use disorder, got arrested for drugs, baby got removed, that's a score of 4. And let's say it's like best case scenario. She has this great mother. She's taking the baby and she drops the baby off for the weekend. She recreationally uses substances and then she picks the baby up on Monday when she's completely sober. She never uses around the baby. There's no daily use. That kid still got removed for reasons that were necessary. Mom got put in jail. But that gave that baby a score 4 right off the bat. Guys, don't go crazy. Don't email me 62 things about Brooke. You're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. We all have room to grow, right? So I understand that there are other scenarios where that would look totally different. I'm talking about just this one scenario. I know that every life is different and how ACE scoring works out for newborn babies varies. But even if all you do is just remove the mom, you gave that kid a score of 2. So it's something that we really have to think about. ACE scoring is very serious and has extreme long-term outcomes. Now, somebody on this has scored themselves and is going, oh my God, I'm a 6. Okay, deep breath, deep breath. Let me tell you, I work with a lot of people who have really high ACE scores, who are my coworkers. You can rise above your ACE scores, but it's kind of an implicit bias. Bias, right? That if you have an elevated ACE score, you've got to be really conscious of that, and you have to fight that. You're going to need good therapy. You're going to need good support, better than the people like me who are on the other end of the ACE score, okay? I have an ACE score of 0. It has nothing to do with me. It was just me being born into a family with 2 parents who did not want to kill each other or me and basically protected me from violence, and we got lucky that there was none. So don't freak out if your ACE score's high. Just know that you need to be conscious of that. You need to take care of you, and you need to be extra careful with making sure that you have everything that you need to be successful. Surround yourself with resources. Fortify yourself with resources to be successful. All right, guys. I love this. I feel this really sums it up. Fear cooks ignorance, which distills itself into hate. So true and explicit biases are often based on fear, ignorance, and hate. Fear and ignorance working together to equal hate. I know that explicit bias is something I really hope if you've gone into the fields where you're trying to help other people, you're not somebody that carries around a bunch of explicit bias. I see explicit bias from people that I love and care about when it comes to religion. I don't see it very much with race, but I will see people who have a lot of opinions about other religions. I'm not going to get into that for the sake of this argument. We could go on and on about that forever. I just urge you to remember that ignorance and fear together distill down into hate for things that you have ignorance about. So be open-minded, right? Guys, the biggest thing, and I say this in every presentation on every topic I ever give, is that whenever you are dealing with people in any format, I don't care if it's the girl at the grocery store who's like the only person outside this house I ever have any interaction with right now, but anytime you're dealing with anyone, be nice, be empathetic, be open-minded to the option that something's going on in their life that's heavy, all right? Anytime I get cut off in traffic, I say out loud to my kids, oh, that jerk cut me off. You know what? Their dog probably died this morning. They're really upset. They don't have the money to have it cremated, but they live in an apartment so they can't bury it, and they love this dog, and they're traumatized by the dog dying, and they're so upset. Like, I come up with these whole imaginative scenarios because I want my kids to think about life like that, as far as, yeah, that guy might be being a jerk, but why? What's going on with him? How can I help him feel better about them? So, all right, guys, here's my question slide with baby otter, and here's real live grown-up otter. Isn't he so cute? He's very dapper. He's wearing his bow tie today because he's fancy for his presentation. And he does not like this because I got him out of his heated blanket to bring him in. So, with that said, I have a list here of books that I think are worth reading that do a lot to talk about substance use disorders and kind of address the biases related to those specifically. But there's also some great biases that get addressed in this book, Hillbilly Elegy. That book has, that kid, he had every bias against him. He had an 8 score. He had an ACE score probably of at least 5 or 6. And he ended up being a Harvard-trained attorney, very successful, really brought himself up by the bootstraps. But he's the exception to the rule, not the rule. Reading his book really helped me understand a little bit more about that lifestyle. There's also one called Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City. I don't have experience with being evicted. I have never been evicted. And so that book really helped me understand the conundrum that my patients are getting into. He's falling asleep. The conundrum my patients are getting into when they get evicted, they have no permanent address. And we're saying to them, why can't you just fill out your Medicaid forms? They don't have a permanent address. How are they supposed to ever get their Medicaid forms? So biases that we have to be consciously aware of. That is my presentation. Again, please feel free to contact me. My email address is bschaefer@ecommunity.com. And again, this is my dog, Baby Otter. His name is actually totally Baby Otter. And we are glad to have you join us today. Thank you so much.
I would like to remind everyone that we will conclude each day with a polling evaluation. This information is extremely important for us to provide feedback to our funders and grants. The conference is only available because of these grants. Without providing them feedback, we may not get these grants for future conferences, so please complete the evaluation. For those who are interested in the NASW Continuing Education Hours, you will receive an email with a survey following the event. I would also like to remind you that you can help us by participating in our online silent auction through ClickBid, which will close at noon on April 30th. Thank you for attending today, and I hope you will join us again tomorrow for the second day of our series.